All right, here we go. So this training is divided into 2 parts. The first part, I'm going to review with you parts of a speech. For some of you, this is, actually, should we close the door? Is it loud? No. No? Leave it open? Open? Open. All right. Okay, I will talk loudly. So part 1, we are reviewing the parts of a speech. For some of you, this is total recap. Okay, for some of you, this is brand new information. For some of you, I'm going to be saying things that are going to trigger trauma from high school when you had to make outlines for your essays, because there's going to be a lot of similarities, all right? If the outline is the map of your speech, then the key parts are the landmarks that tell people where to go and keep them engaged and interested. So think about when you're giving someone directions to your house, you might tell them to look for a gas station or a particular piece of art or a mural or a street with an interesting name. As you create an outline for your speech, think of it as creating a map to help the audience get to where you want them to go. Landmarks keep them engaged, and it keeps them on the right track. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to develop a core purpose for your speech. The core purpose is the specific outcome you want the audience to do, think, or feel by the end of the speech. So the very first thing you do when planning a speech is you start with the end in mind. What is the specific thing you want them to do, think, or feel by the end of the speech? I have a very in-depth training about how to develop a core purpose on YouTube. Totally free. My YouTube channel is Natalie Coaches. I cleared it with Kathleen Bingaman. She said I could tell you guys that. Okay? So there's an in-depth training. It is from a workshop I did last fall, back in September, but it walks you through how to develop the core purpose. For today, here's what you need to know. I have a sample speech that we're going to go through. The core purpose of that speech is, by the end of the speech, the audience will be persuaded to become organ donors. They will be persuaded to become organ donors. Every single word of that speech has to support that core purpose. Every single sentence, every single quote, story, etc. must directly connect to that. Okay? And as we go through, I'm going to keep asking the question, how does this directly connect to my core purpose? And I'm going to show you some examples as we go through, including some that are red herrings. And a red herring is like something that's distracting the audience but doesn't actually support the core purpose. You want to be specific. So it isn't enough just to say that you want to motivate or inspire. What do you want to motivate or inspire the audience to do? Do you want to motivate them to go skydiving to overcome a fear of flying? Do you want to inspire them to what? Give me an example. What's something you've inspired someone to do or want to be inspired to do?
Donate organs.
Donate. Yes, someone's listening. Ooh, inspire them to become a volunteer victim advocate. That's powerful, right? And that is very specific. What else?
Vote in the next election.
Vote in the next election. Yeah. What else? Become an officer of the club. Yeah. You guys are on it. It's even after lunch. I'm impressed. Good. So being specific in your purpose helps guide the organization of your speech because it creates a litmus test. How does this piece directly support my core purpose? So if you're inspiring someone to become an officer of a club and you include a piece about the downsides of becoming an officer, does that support your core purpose? No. If you want to inspire them to become a club officer and you include a whole paragraph about how cool it is to compete in contests, does that support your core purpose? No. And here's where it gets tricky. You're still talking about Toastmasters, you're still talking about roles, but that's not directly connected to your core purpose, therefore it's not helping you achieve your goal. Good?
Good.
All right, let's keep going. How many of you have heard the phrase through line before when it comes to speeches? A few of you. If you've never heard it before, or if you heard it and you were confused by it, the through line is anything that directly supports your core purpose. Anything that directly supports your core purpose. I've heard some speakers describe it as a thread that weaves through and holds everything together. I've heard some people describe it as the spine of your speech. So think about what your spine does. It holds everything together and keeps it from getting weird, right? Okay, so if I use the phrase through line, that's what I'm referring to. Anything that supports your core purpose. And I've worked with speakers before where I've had to ask them, what's your through line? Because the things are not fitting together well. Okay? So here's the first part of the speech that we're going to talk about. And this is the introduction. And the introduction typically gets sorely underused. The introduction is where you must hook the audience. You must hook the audience. There's a few tools you can use. First, an interesting quote. You see this a lot in TED Talks. They open up with an interesting quote. A story that illustrates your main point. Stories are very powerful because they elicit an emotional response. Human beings make decisions with emotions, not the logic. And emotions and logic reside in two different parts of your brain. And once you know that, it changes how you interact with people because we make a lot of dumb decisions based on emotions, right? Yeah. But you can use that to your advantage as a speaker. A story elicits an emotional response. It gets them engaged. A startling statistic might do the same thing. Or a question that gets the audience thinking. All of these are tools. And we're going to talk a little bit further about what it would look like. So we're going to convince people to become organ donors, right? We need a compelling intro. And in this case, I'm going to go with a story. This one is about Jane, a wife and mother who had a massive heart attack and had to get a heart transplant. This is a real thing that happens. For those of you who don't know this, it wasn't that long ago that if you had a massive heart attack, there was nothing they could do for you. If your heart was damaged beyond repair, you were done. They called it a widowmaker. Now you can get a heart transplant. So this is one of the important things. The reason that this works, I could give you a startling statistic, and that would get your attention, but maybe not the right attention. I want you to feel something for someone else. I'm purposely going to describe Jane as a wife and mother so you know what kind of person she is, what roles she occupies, and that you probably have people in your life who occupy those roles as well. You have a mother. Maybe you have a wife. Maybe you are a wife. Maybe you have kids. And you start to identify yourself with Jane's situation. So a powerful story in your intro immediately gets people in the audience to put themselves in the same shoes, and you've created a connection. Whereas if I had opened up with a quote about organ donation, sure, that might work. A startling statistic might turn people off or scare them. What else could we have done that may not have been as effective?
Ask a question.
Could have asked a question. And
Be an organ donor.
yeah, do you want to be an organ donor? That can go in many different directions for you though, right? And by the way, if you ask people, do you want to be an organ donor, and half your audience says no, well, you know what you're working with.
Yeah.
But none of those are going to be as effective as Jane, right? Here's the thing though, you have to really think through what is going to be the most effective and try different things out. So my club, Speakers Roundtable, we really pride ourselves on being a workshop club and getting a lot of coaching. And I'll see speakers who will try out different intros. How did this work? How did you feel about this? What was most compelling? Practice. Things to avoid in your intro. First, using too many fillers. Toastmasters, you guys, when you open up and say, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, and people in the audience, cut it out. You don't need that. All right, we know we're Toastmasters. We know we're ladies and gentlemen, and we know we're in the audience. You don't need that, all right? Giving the audience your entire outline, which sounds something like this. Today I'm going to tell you about why you need to become an organ donor, some of the pitfalls of being an organ donor, how to register to become an organ. No, you don't need that. You can say something like, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why it's important to become an organ donor. But here's the caveat. Make sure you give them 3 reasons. How often have you heard someone say that and then you only counted 2? Or you counted 4 and you're like, wait, how many? Telling an unrelated quote or story. This catches a lot of people because it might seem loosely related, but it's not. Let me give you an example. Let's say I told you a little bit about Jane having a heart attack, but then I went into Jane's health habits leading into the heart attack. Well, she exercised and she ate really healthy and she has 4 kids. What have I done?
scared half the audience.
Say that again?
You scared half the audience.
I scared half the audience, like, oh my God, she was healthy and she still had a heart attack. What else have I done? I distracted them. This isn't about Jane's health habits. This is about organ donation. Okay? So yes, tangentially related. It's still about Jane, still about her heart health, but we're specifically staying focused on organ donation, therefore it must directly connect. Just the same, I've heard people use statistics that don't really fit. This is how statistics get misused. So if you want to encourage people to vote, but you use a statistic about voters in Canada, or a statistic that's really outdated, that's not actually going to serve your purpose. It's somewhat related, but not closely enough to support it. Okay? And finally, asking a question that's so deep or introspective that you're going to lose your audience. Here's the best example I have. A few years ago, a speaker opened with this question: what was the most pivotal year of your life? I do not know what she said after that. Guess what I was thinking about?
What's the most pivotal year?
Yeah, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds right now to resolve that question in your head. Because, and that was the feedback we gave her was, well, my mind immediately went to, was it 2005 when I went to grad school? Was it 2009 when I met my husband? I don't know. Don't ask a question that's so broad and introspective that you're triggering like an existential crisis, okay? But if you ask them something like, have you thought about being an organ donor? They'll get a yes or no response in their head and you can move on, okay? That makes sense?
Yeah.
So if it triggers like a major life introspection, don't use that question, you're gonna lose them. Supporting points, wait, did I, ooh. Okay, no, we're on track. Sorry, I moved some things around today. So we have an introduction. Now we're going to go into supporting points. Supporting points are the body paragraphs of your speech. They're the body paragraphs of your speech, and they help explain and support your core purpose. So for example, if our purpose is to persuade people to become organ donors, then at least one of our supporting points should be about the lives that are saved due to organ donation. Okay? Because that is a major benefit. You need to know what kind of statistics we're facing to understand why this is so valuable. And you also have to make that information related to your audience. Because what happens, especially with organ donation, is people get into this mindset: that doesn't affect me, why should I care? All right? So here's how this looks. Your first paragraph is about Jane. Your second paragraph, you're going right into, here are the statistics. Put people in those shoes. Jane did not anticipate ever needing a heart transplant, but statistically, she had one, and it was possible because people signed up to become organ donors. You might need a heart someday, or a kidney, or a liver, or a cornea, and you won't know it right now. Maybe you will, but for the most part, you're taking them on this journey, you're putting them in the shoes, and now you're giving them the evidence about why this is important. It would also make sense to include a paragraph about why people are not organ donors, so you can address some objections. And I'm going to show you what that looks like, okay? We'll get to the objections part. Within your supporting paragraphs, you have details, okay? Details are what flesh out and develop your paragraphs. And by the way, I gave you guys some sample outlines, including an annotated one, so you can take a look at this. No matter how big or small, every single detail needs to directly support your core purpose. And so here are some example details. By the way, these statistics are 100% true. In August of 2017, 114,000 people were waiting on the transplant list. Okay? 95% of American adults report supporting organ donation, but only 54% are actually signed up to donate. So there's a disconnect there. That's something you should probably address in your speech. And one person can donate up to 8 life-saving organs, which means one person can possibly save 8 lives. Why would any of those details be important to include? What does each one do?
Shows the impact that one person can have.
Yeah, that's huge, right? Shows the impact. What else?
Shows the need.
Yeah. This is not a problem that has been solved, but it can be solved, and it shows that we have to solve it.
It shows that the person listening to you can be the solution, and that serves your purpose of persuasion.
Yes, absolutely. We come into it assuming that people in our audience are kind and giving and want to be helpful to others, because that is the truth of about 99.9% of human beings. Seriously.
I think too that some people, when we talk about organ, they think about heart and the big things, but there can be some minor things that you can really do too.
Yeah, absolutely. My husband's cousin recently donated a kidney to, was it her boss? Yeah, her best friend, okay. I was like, wait, her boss? Really? Yes, her best friend. And by the way, they're both in their late 20s. They're super young, okay? But it shows that, you're right, anybody can make a difference. But we need a little bit of context, right? You can throw out a statistic, but if your speech is all statistics, it leaves it cold and data-driven. So we need to give the audience a little bit more information. So here's this supporting detail. One person can donate up to 8 life-saving organs. A compelling way to explain or add context to this detail is to tell the true story about a person who was an organ donor and who did this to save the lives of others. Okay, I used to write for a blog about heart health and heart transplants, and I heard about the story of a 12-year-old boy who was tragically killed in an accident, and his parents made the choice to donate his organs, and he really did save the lives of 8 people. And their mentality is, we have lost our son, and there's nothing we can do about that, but we can help other people from losing their loved ones. You tell that story, people are like, I need to sign up right now to do this. Because I would hope that if I'm in that situation where I need the organ, that someone else has that generosity of spirit. You keep them connected, you keep them engaged. Every single thing connects to that core purpose. If you're using a statistic like this one that's going to warrant questions, I already told you that 95% of American adults report being totally on board with organ donation, but only 54% are signed up. Your audience needs to know something about that. Did you know that here in the United States you have to actually sign up? It's not automatic. And a lot of people just forget to check that box. That gives important context to help your audience understand the information. When they understand, they buy in. When they buy in, they remember. So as you add these details, as you add a story or a statistic or a quote, remember, you have to also ask yourself, does the audience need to know anything else about this to understand why it's important? It doesn't mean you have to give like a 10-minute long explanation, but usually a sentence or two is very helpful. If I just left you hanging that 54% are only signed up to donate, and I didn't say anything else about that, at least half of you would be like, well, why? Why? I'm going to answer that so you don't get stuck on that question as I keep moving in the speech. Now, intro, we're moving into our first paragraph. The thing that links your paragraphs together are transitions. This is where a lot of people struggle, is how do you create the links? Transitions are sentences, usually 1 or 2, that link your ideas together to establish the relationship, maintain the flow of your speech, and it helps the audience follow your train of thought. Remember, the human brain learns by making connections. It's always looking for the connection. You remember things if you link it to something else. So here's a memory trick if you want to remember something. Visualize what you were wearing. Visualize what the room looked like. Visualize who else was in the room. As you start to build these links, your brain creates a picture, your neural pathways connect, and you remember. Transitions do that for your audience. Here's an example that would link 2 of our paragraphs from our organ donation speech. Put on my speech voice. While it's incredible to think that up to 8 lives can be saved from one organ donor, there are still people who are not convinced that they should sign up. I would like to address some of the common misconceptions people have about organ donation. This links 2 of our paragraphs. It links the paragraph, our second paragraph, what happens when people receive organ donations, and why people would choose not to become donors. So you're creating that connection, you're building the neural pathway, you're taking them down the journey. Just like in a map, you're keeping people moving, all the roads have to connect, right? You didn't jump roads to get here, did you? No, you're creating the map. I see some people nodding like, yes, I did. I drove right over a lake to get here. All right. I'm going to give you these transitions, then we're going to stand up and stretch because it's very warm in here. 2 questions will help you develop and refine the transitions of your speech. First, what does the audience need to know first to understand what's next? What does the audience need to know first to understand what's next? You can't talk about why people don't become organ donors before you've talked about why they should, because they're going to wonder what you're even talking about. You haven't built the value yet. You haven't built the value. So what do they need to know first to understand what's next? And how are these 2 points related? How are these 2 points related? That second question will change how you think about your speeches because you must be able to answer it in 1 sentence. If you need a paragraph to explain the connection, chances are they don't work together. You might need to move a paragraph. You might need to cut something. You might need to evaluate whether or not it really supports your core purpose. But you must be able to answer that in 1 sentence. So going back to Jane's health habits, you would need more than just a sentence to explain why talking about her diet was related to becoming an organ donor. Because they're not closely related. Does that make sense? Questions. Do you need to stand up and like stretch to get blood moving, or are you doing good? Good? Keep going? All right. There's hardcore people in the front who are like, we're doing this, guys. We're moving. Here's some helpful transition words and phrases. However, while, therefore, yet, just like, similar to, and my favorite, once you understand blank, it's important to know blank. Once you understand blank, it's important to know blank. That builds a strong connection. Once you understand how vital it is that you sign up to become an organ donor, it's important to know why some people choose not to. I'll give you a minute. We ready? Yeah. All right. And then finally, you're going to wrap it up with a conclusion. The main purpose of the conclusion is to wrap up your main points and direct them back to your core purpose in a memorable way. So if we're trying to persuade people to become organ donors, then we need to be as memorable as possible to incite action. Because here's what happens. In the room, people are like, yes, I'm going to do this. And then they walk out the door, and what do? Nothing. That was a great speech. Good job. You can also use the conclusion to connect back to your intro to provide your speech some nice bookends. This is really effective for 2 reasons. First, the audience feels like they got a complete speech. They feel good about it. Second, if you find you can't tie your conclusion back to your intro, what should you do to your intro? Change it, yeah. This is one of those litmus tests where if you can't create a nice bookend, you might be missing something. Maybe something doesn't fit. So here's what I would do. I would connect back to Jane's story and describe how now that she's been given a life-saving heart transplant, she's able to pay it forward. Maybe I would talk about how Jane now volunteers for the American Heart Association. Maybe she's shared her story in a blog that's influenced other people. Maybe she's done volunteer advocate work. Maybe she now gets people to go and do all sorts of things that create a positive impact. But here's what you're doing. It's not just about Jane anymore. It's about the fact that one person's life is saved, and now they're creating this positive ripple effect, which ties back to what you're saying, that one organ donor can save 8 lives, right? What could those 8 people do with those organs? What kind of positive impact could they make? And now you're really getting persuasive here because you're showing people how valuable this is. In certain coaching sessions, we call it the button down. You get people to very clearly think about the value that they can have and provide others. And that actually motivates them. We see a huge increase in the work they do. I do a lot of TEDx coaching, and in TED Talks, they've actually really started transitioning into actionable things. So there's one thing to have an idea we're spreading, but if you just have the idea and then you get off the stage, what good is that? You have to get people to do something. So here's part 2. Part 2 is how to create an outline. You have outlines in front of you. You have an annotated outline, which is the different parts that are labeled. You have a sample outline of the speech that we did for Jane. And then you, at the very back, you have a blank outline that you can use for yourself. Okay? Again, if you were traumatized by your high school composition class where you had to make outlines and you swore you'd never do it again, I've got bad news for you. This dramatically improves your speeches. I even get so type A that I color code my outlines. You can ask Shannon because we were working together on a speech and I was like color coding everything and moving it around, but was it helpful?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So great outline. First, there's 5 key benefits. It shows the structure of your speech and it makes it easy to identify how and if the key points and examples you're using actually relate to your core purpose. So before you even get up in front of your club to give a speech, the outline is going to let you know whether or not you are accomplishing your purpose. It's the map of your speech. It shows you where you need to go so you don't get lost. And it keeps you on track and planning for a lot of time. How many of you have blown right past your timing light? You're Toastmasters. You all should be raising your hands. Look at you. Some people are like, no, I never do that. Whatever, guys. It helps you remember the speech. So if you're curious about how to give a speech without using notes, make an outline. You're creating your own neural pathways. And finally, it shows you how to keep the audience's attention. I'm going to get to that. To begin your outline, you're going to take your core purpose and jot down all of the ideas you have about how to achieve it. So I would take a piece of paper. You can do this right now if you want, or you can just take notes. And you would write down your core purpose. Let's say mine's about Jane. All the ideas I have, everything I want to talk about. I would also include interesting facts I've read about, compelling stories, anything that I'm confused or unsure about. So anything I need to do research on, write it all down. Just do a brain dump. By the way, I recommend doing this at least a few days before giving the speech. Not the drive to your Toastmasters meeting where you're speaking that night. Yes, which I know are all, I do that too. I try not to. But in this rough stage, we're just concerned with generating enough material to start building a great speech. We want to generate enough material. Don't get attached to it though. Do not get emotionally attached to your material because there's going to be stuff you're going to need to cut. Once you have at least a page's worth of ideas, it's time to start plugging it into an outline format, okay? So before you go right to the outline, do your brain dump, get as many ideas as possible. You can start to sort through. Is this going to be a supporting point? Will it warrant its own paragraph? Is this just an interesting detail? Does this even support my core purpose? Do I need to find out additional information? All that's going to be dumped out on the paper. You want to stick to bullet points and keywords. Keep it simple. Make sure it's no longer than a page. Even if you're speaking for an hour, if your outline is going over a page, you might be going way into tangents, unrelated info, explaining too long. Okay, keep it simple at first. You can always expand if need be. And read it out loud as you go, because it is a speech. I see so many speakers, they get on stage. How many times did you practice? None. Wow. Not effective. Don't do that. Read it out loud. How does it sound? Here's a strategy that I love. It's called the Post-it strategy. Well, if you're new to creating an outline and you find the blank page on your screen intimidating, write everything down on Post-it notes. So you have one Post-it for your core purpose, a Post-it for each supporting detail, your supporting points. That way you can move them around really easily. If you want to get really into the organization like I do, you can color code. So you can have like green for your core purpose, blue for your supporting points, pink for your details. Some of you are looking at me like, I'm not doing that. And some of you are like, yes, organization. But the nice thing about the Post-its is you can add, subtract, move around. I'm also a huge fan of a live Google document because it shows you all the previous versions you've done. So if you have a Gmail account, Are you guys familiar with Google Docs? Good. With all my TEDx speakers and all of my coaching clients, we always use a Google Doc because we can move stuff, we can make comments, we can add labels, and we can always see previous versions. So if we need to go back to an older version, we can do that. You know, I was only semi-joking about you guys like fanning people, but oh my gosh, it is very toasty in here. Whew.
We're Toastmasters.
But and don't worry, this is water. It's Friday. All right. Remember when I said that the outline will help you keep the audience's attention? Here's why. As you speak, the audience's attention span goes down. It doesn't matter who you are, even if you're Tony Robbins, this is true. This is how your brain works. Neurologists estimate you've got 20 minutes of attention span and then it plummets, which means your speech must always increase in intensity to maintain the attention. Every movie that you love is structured like this. Every book you've read, newspaper articles, blog posts, television episodes have this exact structure. They must increase in intensity. So I'm going to slightly block my projector here. If you look at the sample outline, it shows the increase in intensity. That third paragraph about why people sometimes do not become organ donors is a powerful shift that wakes people up. So you're going benefit, benefit, benefit. You're starting to lose them. Why would people not want to do this? Shift. Wait, I'm listening again. Okay? So you must always increase the intensity to keep their attention. If you're going to address objections, do it near the end, because by shifting gears, you're waking them up again. Does that make sense? So the outline helps you see, are you increasing the intensity of what you're talking about? So this is the sample speech outline. The finished product is in your handout, so you can see how I mapped it out. You can see the core purpose you won't always say out loud, but you'll know that it's what's guiding you. Your intro, your supporting point with the details, and your conclusion. So you have that as a sample to take a look. When you're telling a story, you actually still follow this exact format. When you were taking literature classes back in the day, do you remember learning about Freytag's pyramid? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it shows the escalation of the story, right? Every story needs to have an escalation in intensity. Ooh.
When you color code your organization, or I think you said you use either post-it notes, well, when you outline and color code, is it color coded also for intensity?
No.
Is that something you track? Or?
But that's a good idea. That's, yeah. Like light green to dark green or pink to red. That could be really cool. That's a good idea. All right. Glad you're here. Yeah. And here's what else the outline does for you. Beware the two-headed speech. So, a common mistake many speakers make is they accidentally mash two different speeches together. For instance, let's say we open our speech about Jane and her heart transplant. Then we add a section about Jane's health habits. We already know that doesn't totally fit, right? Now we have two speeches. One is about persuading people to become organ donors, but the second now is adopting habits to prevent heart disease. We have two different speeches. I see this happen all the time. All the time. It's a Frankenstein speech because you've mashed different things together that seem like they fit, but it just makes it kind of scary. And it's sneaky because they both relate to Jane's story, but they're actually two different speeches. Two different speeches, okay? So the outline helps you avoid that. I blasted through a lot of material, knowing we'd have time at the end for questions. So take it away. What questions do you have? Joe?
Where did you get your data, your research data on organ donations?
At the American Heart Association's website. Akhilesh?
How is the title important? How much that should reveal about what we are talking about in the speech?
Oh, that's a good question. The title should hook the audience, okay? It should hook the audience. Ron, you always have great titles. Do you have anything you want to add, or?
Go off your own grid.
Care to?
It surprises you, it will surprise them.
Yeah. You can be really creative with the titles. There's a lot you can do with it. I like to avoid titles that are cliches, as in things you've heard a million times before. But that's just my personal preference. Good question. What else?
Yeah, one thing that I'd like you to comment on that I didn't see in a particular outline is when I'm listening to a speaker, one of the first questions in my mind is, why is this person interested in this topic? So what makes you an authority, or why you're interested? So why are you talking to me about organisms? What's your personal connection to it? Was there someone in your family? Did it affect you? So I think getting that in, I always give that as feedback sometimes in evaluations. And
Yeah.
it's a great speech, but why are you talking about this? What's your interest in it?
That's a really good question. There's two ways you can handle it, maybe more. The first is the introduction that the speaker uses to bring you on stage. If you're using the intro to have them tell everybody all of your Toastmasters credentials, you're missing an incredible opportunity. So the intro could be something like this. In 2014, Natalie's uncle suffered a widowmaker heart attack right before Christmas. He received a life-saving transplant, and it completely changed the way he went about his business. She's here today to tell you about why you should sign up to become an organ donor. So that's option one. Use the intro that the MC is using to get you on stage, okay? Way more compelling than Natalie did this and then, blah, blah. Okay? Yeah. The second thing is the story you use in your intro can be yours. Back in 2014, we received a phone call. My husband's Uncle Tim had suffered a widowmaker heart attack, and they didn't think he was going to make it. He's only 54 years old. He'd been exercising at the time he suffered the heart attack. And when they rushed him to the hospital, the doctor said, there's nothing we can do. But then his wife decided to get a second opinion. By the way, true story, always get a second opinion. But you see what I did there? Now you know why it matters. So there's a few ways you can handle that. Good. What else?
What to do
What?
with a person that prefers to do impromptu speeches than actually write outlines?
Are you that person?
I fumble through outlines and prepared speeches, and I'm very good at impromptu, even for 6 minutes.
When you do impromptu, how do you organize information in your head so that you're very good? How do you know you're very good?
I have an outline of the story,
That you prepared ahead of time or on the spot?
a little bit ahead of time because I've been thinking about it, because I have to have a speech in a week or so.
Right.
I'm not aware that there is a pattern, and at the moment the story comes out, but what I had outlined never does. But it is the story.
So
It might not finish the same way, but
I would do some introspective work here. And here's, do you video yourself when you're speaking?
nothing. I do nothing. I run away from practicing. I run away.
Why?
All the bad habits.
But you know you do. That's the first step, is admitting you have a problem. Here's what I would do. All right? I would start recording yourself as you're speaking, and then every single time you're preparing for a speech, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why did you guys join Toastmasters? Learn to be a better speaker. What does that entail? Practice? Yeah. Incorporating feedback, learning how to write a speech, impacting your audience.
There's a set of habits and process you'll always kind of follow without fail. That's just going to get you better and better results. So you do need to develop a process, some kind of method that works for you.
Yeah. My experience when I was teaching public speaking, remember I taught artists and designers, and all the time they were like, yes, I knew it. So is my husband. They were like, I just want to draw, and then I want to get up without any preparation and talk about what I drew. But once I showed them that if you learn how to prepare ahead of time. The impact that you create talking about whatever you drew is much greater. And artists love to be able to sell their work. And I don't just mean like selling a painting. I mean, if you're a graphic designer, convincing the ad agency to buy your work. If you work in advertising, convincing the client to sign you. If you're a website designer, it's convincing the client to hire you. All of that is selling your work. When you prepare ahead of time, when you outline your ideas and identify your key purpose, your results dramatically increase for the better. So if I were you, I would set aside the part of you that doesn't like doing that, because it requires developing new habits. I would get attached to the reason why you joined Toastmasters in the first place and try new habits. Start small. Maybe you start with one Post-it note. One Post-it note, and then you can add, and then keep practicing and see what happens. Good.
I like doing humor speeches.
Yes.
I struggle with the intro. I rewrite it 50 times, trying to make it short enough and still have a funny component to it. But is there a specific thing with the core purpose that I should be doing that I may not be doing? Should the core purpose have humor in mind or not?
Ooh, this is a good question. And John, you are a humorous speech contest winner, aren't you?
Yes.
What do you do for your intros and your purpose of developing the humorous speech? I've got one answer in mind, but I want to hear what you say.
Depends. Usually I'm a pretty dry sense of humor, so I find if I can just set up why I'm doing the speech and then at the end have some really slapstick piece. So
Yeah.
This morning, if you were at the contest, I was just trying to have some fun, but yet be serious about table topics while we're doing it. So I said, all right, this is right before lunch. And if we had a meeting right before lunch, usually I'm thinking about lunch. So I just thought, I'll just poke fun at that. And then get into some serious reasons, which is we're practicing table topics. So when you get to a job interview, you can nail it.
Mm-hmm.
But we're doing it and it's just like, hey, just some way to poke fun at maybe what you would laugh at.
Mm-hmm. In terms of core purpose, I'm going to give you an example from one of my favorite stand-up comedians ever. Do you guys know who Mike Birbiglia is? Okay, Mike Birbiglia has several specials on Netflix. Go to Netflix. It's called My Girlfriend's Boyfriend. It is probably the most brilliant stand-up set I've ever seen in my life. He's telling an extended story. And this is powerful because when stand-up comedy is like one of the most intense forms of public speaking, his core purpose is to talk about why he decided to get married based on being in a drunk driving accident where he was not the drunk driver. So he's taking these two unrelated things, weaving them together to create this brilliant story about why he decided to get married. So his core purpose in this case is by the end of this stand-up routine, the audience will, and I'm doing this off the cuff here, so forgive me, understand the connection between my car accident and why I decided to get married. I could probably refine that a little bit, but I've seen humor speeches. I think Matt, and I'm blanking on his last name, he competed last year. He did this hilarious speech, Floyd, about going to KFC in China. Yeah, and trying to order chicken in Chinese, and it was amazing. And he has a stutter, so it just added to it, and he kind of wove these things together. So I would say that your core purpose is getting people to look at something in a new way and finding the humor in that. Does that make sense? Good, what else?
Yeah, I got one. I almost don't know how to phrase it, but it kind of gets back to Al's question. What do you do when you put some of your why in your introduction, how you want people to introduce you to the audience, and then dismiss it and make up something about you?
After the speech, punch him. Yeah.
It's left out.
Ooh. All right. I'll address this in two parts. First, if you are the MC bringing people on stage, always read the intro they gave you. Unless you see a huge issue, in which case you should address that ahead of time, right? Because I hate that too. That you're going to have to really tap into your impromptu table topic skills, and you could say something like, well, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about why this is important to me, and then circle back, knowing that your audience needs that key piece of information, and because your MC didn't do that for you, you're going to have to pick up the slack a little bit, otherwise your speech won't be successful. Yeah. But yeah, and then
Do you write your outline? Do you write your speech word for word?
it depends. I don't, because I don't need to anymore, but I've been doing this for a long time, but you might need to. TEDx Atlanta speakers, they write those talks out word for word. We actually call it a script, and they have it memorized, and they always push back. I don't want to memorize, I hate memorization. You want to know why memorization is awesome? When you get on stage and you've remembered 95% of your speech, your nerves go down, muscle memory kicks in. The odds of you losing your place go way down. And then you can focus on delivery and how you're moving and how you're staging. Shannon, is your international speech memorized? You betcha. How many times have you done it? Lots. Lots. Those TED Talks you see, most of them are completely memorized. That's why they're so good. None of those people are professional speakers. We put them through the ringer to get that good.
Stand-up comedians, they also memorize their jokes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. John?
When you write every single word, then every single word is calibrated to your goal, whether it's to be funny or whether it's to get people to be an organ donor. Once you write it down, every literary technique you drop in, every phrase, every adjective needs to or can then be honed to lead people to that conclusion that you're going to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you plan on practicing a lot, the words start to come and you start to remember them. But early on, I highly recommend writing it down, refining it. How many of you do the same speech over and over again? Shane, you should at least raise your hand. You're missing a huge opportunity to get better. Getting better at public speaking isn't doing 80 different speeches. It's taking one speech and doing it 80 times. It is working that content to the bone. It's working it till you are sick of it. It is taking it to clubs like Speakers Roundtable, where people like Ron will stand up and say, here's what you did well, here's what you got to do better. And then 7 other people do that to you, which is scary, but super helpful. Rework that speech. If you did it the first time and you didn't like how it turned out, what should you do? Do it again. And if you have an outline and you've written it down, you know what you need to change. If you don't have the outline, if you don't have that tangible thing, it's a lot harder to work on it to make it better.
Try that same speech at different clubs.
Yes. Yeah, but here's the thing. Toastmasters, you're here to get better, right? Your club can sit through your speech a few times. Don't worry, yeah. Let them see you grow.
That's one good thing about the Pathways program in level 1, that second speech after the icebreaker, you do it and then you do it again based on the evaluation you received in that one. So that's a good exercise that we learned early on, how to refine our speech and make it a little better based on the feedback you received from your evaluator.
Yeah, absolutely. Akhilesh.
How much important is choosing a vocabulary, like a simple word? Sometimes I check synonyms and then should we pick more complex word just to show like our writing is too good, or like how to choose words, vocabulary especially?
You should have a variety because variety keeps your audience engaged. So don't use a big word for the sake of using a big word. Use a humongous, unusual word because it disrupts the monotony and keeps your audience engaged. Plus that's why we do word of the day, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. We're expanding your vocabulary. I have an app on my phone, dictionary.com, has a word of the day every day, and it'll even pronounce it for you. That's a great way to build your vocabulary. Reading a lot, but keep the words interesting. You want to keep your sentence structure, some short sentences, some long sentences. It keeps things varying, keeps people engaged. I think we have time for one more question.
You spoke on it a little bit, but delivering to the audience, how do you control your stage presence, not pacing, but controlling the stage?
Practice. And I realize I tend to pace a lot, I get a lot of energy up here, so I'm like, that's one of the benefits of doing your speech over and over again. So when you really keep practicing, you start to stage it. So you say, at this line, I'm going to walk over here. And then you talk and you plant yourself. And then when I get to this line, I'm going to move over here. Watch the contestants for international speech tomorrow because many of them have done that. They actually have cues, like they're actors on stage. Moreover, because we know our brain learns by making connections, it's also looking for visual and physical connections. So if you start blocking your speech, you say, I'm going to say my intro here, and then my first supporting point is going to be over here, and then my next point is going to be over here, you're actually reinforcing the speech in your brain. And it will help you remember, and it reduces nerves. Very, very important.
As a young Toastmaster, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how hard to work, how much to prepare. In other words, I've had the experience of really working hard and doing the same speech over and over and just condensing and refining and putting in hours and hours and hours. And then I've also tried 2 days in advance to just throw something together. On a typical Toastmaster speech, what is appropriate?
I would say it depends on the speech and the audience. The international speech contestants have spent hours and hours and hours because they want to get it right. Some speeches, like, oh gosh, I don't know. We're an hour in, I'm totally out of words now. There are some speeches that you probably don't need to put as much time on depending on what you're speaking about or who you're speaking to. So for instance, if you're doing a 10-minute presentation at work, you want to put some practice in, but you probably don't need to do it 80 times. If you're competing though, when the nerves are high, emotions are high, you want to practice quite a bit. I would say the bigger the audience, the more you want to practice because that can get really intimidating. And when we get nervous, that's when our brain is like, I'm out. And then you get up there and you're like, oh my gosh. So, depends.
Can I say it a little differently?
Yeah.
What would be perceived as disrespectful when you step up in front of your Toastmasters Club and give a speech?
Got it. Here's what I think, this is my opinion, of what would be disrespectful. It has nothing to do with how you deliver it. It's whether or not you had a point. So if you get up here and you don't have a point, you've wasted their time. We can work out the ums and the ahs, and yes, delivery is very important, but if you get up here and you don't have a point for being up here other than to talk and hear yourself talk, I think that's disrespectful. Yeah, we've all heard those speeches. Many of us have given those speeches just because we didn't know any better when we were practicing. But when you start identifying what your core purpose is, as in what you're here to deliver to the audience, things fall into place. Then you're no longer being disrespectful. All right, guys, I believe that we are at the end of time. Thank you so much. Are those helpful?